Imagine waking up to discover that one of the largest seas on Earth is disappearing. Not because of climate change, not because of a natural disaster, but because humanity decided to make it vanish. It sounds impossible, yet a real plan once proposed exactly that. And hidden inside this forgotten idea is a consequence so massive it could reshape the entire planet. Picture the Mediterranean Sea slowly shrinking year after year. Cruise ships stranded in places that were once deep water. Ancient shipwrecks emerging from the depths. New land appearing where waves ruled for millions of years. But here's the strange part. The goal wouldn't be destruction. It would be creation. A gigantic land bridge connecting Europe and Africa. A brand new supercontinent built without moving a single tectonic plate. The idea was first suggested in the 1920s by German architect Hermann Sorgel. His vision was called Atlantropa. He imagined building a colossal dam across the Strait of Gibraltar, cutting the Mediterranean off from the Atlantic Ocean. At first, it sounded like science fiction, but there was a reason people took it seriously. You see, the Mediterranean loses more water through evaporation than it gains from rivers. Most of its replacement water comes from the Atlantic. Cut that supply off, and the sea starts shrinking all by itself. Slowly, relentlessly. And that's when things changed. Because this wasn't just about creating land. The falling water levels could generate enormous amounts of hydroelectric power, potentially supplying renewable energy across Europe and Africa. A solution to energy shortages. A new continent. A transformed world. But that raises a disturbing question. If the benefits sounded so incredible, why was the project never built? The answer reveals a much darker reality. At first glance, draining the Mediterranean sounds like humanity's greatest engineering achievement. But the deeper you look, the more terrifying it becomes. The Mediterranean covers roughly 2.5 million square kilometers. That's larger than many countries combined. And it reaches depths of around 1,500 meters on average. So how would you even begin draining something that massive? You wouldn't pump the water out. Instead, you'd stop new water from coming in. Once the Strait of Gibraltar was sealed, the Mediterranean would begin shrinking by roughly 1.65 meters every year. That doesn't sound dramatic. Until you realize what happens over decades. Entire coastlines would move. Ports would become useless. Cities that once sat beside the sea would suddenly find themselves miles away from the water. But here's where it gets weird. The newly exposed land wouldn't be fertile paradise. It would become a brutal wasteland. Most of the seabed is coated with salt left behind by evaporated seawater. As the water retreated, vast salt flats would emerge across the landscape. Nothing grows. Almost nothing survives. And because huge sections would sit far below sea level, temperatures could become absolutely extreme. Some projections suggest certain areas could approach nearly 80 degrees Celsius, hotter than any temperature ever officially recorded on Earth. But that's not even the craziest part. The environmental damage wouldn't stay inside the Mediterranean basin. Southern Europe would become drier. Rainfall patterns would shift. Agriculture could collapse across entire regions. Animals would face impossible choices. Adapt, migrate, or disappear. And just when it seems the situation can't get worse, a hidden consequence begins affecting the entire planet. And what happens next changes everything. The biggest danger wasn't inside the Mediterranean. It was everywhere else. Think about it. The Mediterranean contains an enormous amount of water. If that water no longer occupies the basin, it doesn't simply vanish. It gets redistributed throughout Earth's oceans. And this is where the dream becomes a nightmare. Global sea levels could rise by around 10 meters. 10 meters. Enough to rewrite coastlines across the world. Major cities would face catastrophic flooding. Entire neighborhoods would disappear beneath the waves. Millions of people could be forced to relocate. And suddenly, a project designed to unite continents would threaten countless communities across the planet. But here's the truly shocking twist. The greatest obstacle was never engineering. It was consequences. Humanity could potentially build massive dams. We could generate renewable energy. We could expose new land. But controlling the chain reaction afterward? That's a completely different story. The more scientists examined the idea, the more risks emerged. Economic disruption, ecological collapse, extreme climate shifts, massive sea level rise. A supercontinent sounds exciting, until you realize what must be sacrificed to create it. And that's why the Mediterranean remains exactly where it is today. a sea that was almost turned into a desert, a real proposal that nearly changed history, and a reminder that just because humanity can reshape the planet doesn't mean it should. But there's one question that still lingers. If we had actually drained the Mediterranean, would it have become humanity's greatest achievement or its greatest mistake?